everybody, and welcome to another ASMR video here on the channel. Now we're coming up to a couple of years ago when I last did a Norse mythology video, and tonight we're revisiting the topic. I regularly get people asking me to do more sort of legends and myths, so we're diving back in today. But tonight we're going to be looking at potentially some of the lesser known ones, but more of the more strange stories, the more unique ones. So hopefully it should be a good time. Hopefully you'll find it interesting, informative, and as always, relaxing. I thought I would give you a break from my face again tonight. So I'll throw up on screen various images relating to the stories. So without further ado, let's get into story number 1. So our first story is: the entire world was made of body parts. Before the world existed, there was nothing but an empty space known as Ginnungagap. In this void, there was a sea of fire and a collection of glaciers. Eventually, they collided with each other. The result of the collision was Mimir, a hermaphroditic being who created the first giant. Within the frozen glaciers of Ginnungagap, there was also a god named Buri, the first of the Aesir. A few generations later, Odin, half Aesir and half giant, was born along with his two brothers Vili and Vi. Eventually, the three of them got together and decided to create a new world. To do that, they murdered Ymir and turned each of his body parts into a part of the world. Ymir's skin became the earth, his skull became the sky, his brains became the clouds, his blood became the sea, and finally his bones and his teeth became the rocks and the pebbles, respectively. Next up, the title is An Odd Use of Sewing. With complete disregard for his own safety, Loki once decided that it would be extremely comical if he shaved the head of Sif, Thor's wife, while she slept. After a suitable amount of rage from Thor, Loki was able to hold off Thor's physical anger by promising new hair for Sif that was crafted by dwarves. After Loki found the dwarves, he asked them to make the new hair entirely from gold. The dwarves agreed. Then they decided to make a few more gifts to please the rest of the gods, instead of simply leaving with the new hair and extra gifts. Loki bet the dwarves that they could not make gifts that were greater than the ones they had just created. The winner of the bet would receive the loser's head. Loki lost the wager because the newest items included a ship that could be folded to fit into a pocket, a spear that never missed, and Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. When Loki tried to save his life by arguing that the dwarves could have his head, but not the attached neck, the dwarves agreed to a compromise. They got Thor to knock Loki unconscious before sewing Loki's mouth shut with leather. Next up we have Thor as a pretty lady. Although Thor had several children, it could be argued that he was more protective of his hammer Mjolnir than his offspring. In fact, Thor went on the warpath when he woke up one morning to find that his hammer had been giant named Thrymr. He offered to return the hammer only if he was allowed to marry Freya as a kind of strange ransom. Thor and Loki both agreed to Thrymr's terms, but when Freya learned that they intended to trade her to one of their biggest enemies for a hunk of metal, she flatly refused. That's when Thor went to Plan B, dressing up as a lady to try to pass for Freya. After dressing to the nines in a gown, jewellery and headdress, Thor entered Thrymr's castle with Loki by his side. Loki had shapeshifted into a handmaiden. Surprisingly, the two of them made it through the pre-wedding feast without blowing their cover. They recovered Mjolnir when it was brought out as part of the wedding ceremony. The myth ended with Thor, in full queen garb, killing everybody in the room. Okay, next up we have the 8-legged horse. If there was one thing that the Aesir hated, it was giants. The feeling was mutual, and it became obvious that Asgard was under a legitimate threat from giants who started fights for no particular reason. Shortly after the 9 worlds were created, the nameless master builder showed up in Asgard. He threw down the gauntlet, claiming that he would build a giant-proof wall around Asgard in 3 years, if marriage to Freya was his main form of payment. For some reason he also wanted the sun and the moon. The gods eventually agreed to give the master builder only 1 year to complete the job. No assistance but that of a workhorse, and Freya as his only payment. It seemed like a great bargain because the gods were convinced that the task could not be completed in 1 year. Asgard was huge. But the builder was so highly motivated to win Freya that he worked almost non-stop. So Loki decided to take charge of the situation. As proven by several myths, Loki was an adept shapeshifter. If he could turn himself into a woman, a salmon and a hawk, he could easily turn himself into a horse, a lady horse to be specific. Loki shapeshifted into a mare and lured the giant's workhorse from the job site. As a result, the wall was not completed when the year was up. Ultimately, Thor killed the master builder, who was a giant in disguise. Meanwhile, Loki was MIA for several months, before returning with an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. Here we have the triathlon gone wrong. With Loki in tow, Thor would sometimes go on random day trips simply to find trouble. On one such trip, Thor also brought along his servant, Thalfi, or Thjalfi. Some of these pronunciations are very difficult. After a solid day of travelling, the three were stuck in a forest with no shelter except a large cave with a weirdly branching layout. The cave was actually a glove which belonged to a being who called himself Skrymir. He was a giant so large and intimidating that even Thor didn't want to bother him. Skrymir pointed the three of them in the direction of Utgard, a castle filled with giants waiting to fight. Skrymir warned them not to irritate the giants living there, but Thor and his companions immediately ignored the warning. The king of this particular castle informed the three that they couldn't stay unless each proved his unbeatable skill in some area. Loki's skill was eating extremely quickly, Thor's was imbibing alcohol, and Thalfi's was his speed. Each of them was pitted against an opponent from Utgard, and they all failed miserably. By the time that Loki had eaten his share of the meat, His opponent had eaten the other half as well as the bones and half of the trough. When Thor had taken in as much as he could, it didn't even make a dent in the mead. Thjalfi had run barely 3 meters before his opponent had run the entire race. As it turned out, the giant who called himself Skrymir was actually Utgard Loki. He had been fooling the 3 of them the entire time, pitting Thor against a literal ocean, Loki against fire, and Thjalfi against the speed of thought itself. Next story, we have that weird thing called parenthood. As previously mentioned, one of Loki's children was Sleipnir, an 8-legged horse that resulted from Loki sabotaging a bet between Odin and a giant. However, Loki didn't stop there. Several wild nights with the same giantess left him with at least 3 more children. Then there was at least one more son, who was all but anonymous in the myths. But all 5 of these children were involved in Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse. Loki's second child was Hel, a human-like creature who became the ruler of the Norse underworld. Loki's third child was Fenrir, a wolf so large that he had to be chained. He only broke loose when Ragnarok occurred. Loki's 4th child was Jormungandr, a gigantic snake that literally held the world together by grasping its tail in its mouth. When Ragnarok started, Odin rode Sleipnir into battle. Loki had banded together with Hel to lead an army of the dead into battle. But Odin was destined to be killed by Fenrir, and Thor was fated to kill and be killed by Jormungandr. Finally, the anonymous son was eventually slain, and his intestines were turned into iron chains that bound Loki after he caused Baldur's death. The title of this next one is Odin, the One-Eyed Wikipedia. Odin was nothing if not wise. His wisdom came from his obsessive desire to understand absolutely everything. He frequently made sacrifices, often of a self-mutilating nature, to gain knowledge because he believed that knowledge was worth any price. Never mind the fact that he once hanged himself, stabbed himself, and forced himself to fast for over a week to discover and understand the Norse runes. Perhaps an even better example of Odin's extreme thirst for knowledge, and the reason for his one-eyed appearance, was his journey to Mimir's well. Those who successfully partook of the water came away with almost divine knowledge. So Odin once rode to Mimir and requested a drink. Mimir agreed to spare a mouthful, but made Odin's eye the price of the drink. Not only did Odin agree to this price, but he gouged the eye out himself. Get out from under the mistletoe. You wouldn't think that mistletoe was dangerous, but it was used in one of Loki's greatest crimes, the death of Baldur. Contrary to the popular MCU portrayal, Thor was not the golden boy of Asgard. Instead, it was his brother Baldur. Believed to be the favourite god, Baldur apparently broke the Norse stereotype by being pleasant. Given Baldur's beloved status, everyone was understandably disturbed when he claimed to have dreams about his death. Odin took a trip to the underworld to look for answers and returned with bad news. Baldur's dreams were indeed prophetic. In addition, Baldur's death was so important that it served as an omen for the onset of Ragnarok. Frigg, Baldur's mother, forced every single thing in the universe to swear not to harm her son, everything except for mistletoe, because she didn't think that it could harm Balder. While all of this was happening, the gods made a fun game out of throwing things at Balder because he was now all but invincible. After Loki discovered that mistletoe was Balder's equivalent of an Achilles heel, Loki went back to the games. In true trickster fashion, he handed the blind Hoder a piece of mistletoe so large that it was described in the myths as a shaft. Loki told Hoder to have fun. Happy to finally join in the games, Hoder threw the mistletoe so hard that it went straight through Balder, killing him instantly. Next up we have poison is bad for your skin. Despite his wit, Loki was frequently responsible for the problems within the Aesir tribe. The little good that he did probably just resolved mistakes that he had made in the first place. Often Loki was punished for his misdeeds, and then everyone ignored what had happened. But everyone has their limits. With Loki, the final straw occurred when he talked a blind god into accidentally killing Balder with a giant branch of mistletoe and sped up the arrival of Ragnarok, as we just discussed. Odin was determined to capture Loki, who fled Asgard to try to save his own life. Loki holed up in a house specifically engineered to keep watch at all times. During the day, he hid in nearby waterfalls as a salmon to avoid detection. Nevertheless, Odin deduced where Loki was and eventually captured the wily trickster. Loki was taken to a cave that served as his prison. He was fastened in place with iron chains fashioned from the entrails of one of his sons. To add insult to injury, a snake with seemingly endless reserves of venom was placed on a rock just above his head. The venom was strong enough to cause Loki to shake the entire earth with his convulsions whenever the venom made contact with his skin. And our final story rounding off this 10 is floating heads and magic herbs. Mimir was considered to be the wisest of all the Aesir. In fact, he was often asked to provide counsel to the gods. But his existence changed dramatically after the Aesir went to war with a sister tribe called the Vanir. During this battle, it became apparent that both sides were equally matched. The Aesir and the Vanir tried to end their conflict with a truce that included an exchange of hostages. Mimir functioned as the hostage offered up by the Aesir, but that's where things went south for Mimir. Although the Aesir sent his full body to the Vanir, they received only Mimir's head in return. The head was taken back to Asgard, where Odin used herbs to keep it from rotting, and sang magical songs to keep it from dying. Eventually, Mimir's head was relocated to the Well of Erd, where it floated in the water from then on. And that, my friends, was 10 of the strangest stories from Norse mythology. I know for a fact that there are definitely more, so if you would indeed like a part 2, be sure to leave a like and be sure to let me know in the comments down below. I do really like reading these kind of things. is so interesting. But yeah, if a part number 2 is something you would like to see, then definitely let me know down below. But that is gonna do it for tonight's video. I really hope you did enjoy. If you did enjoy this video and you're able to, then please do give it a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. But until the next video, everybody,